The nature of the evolution of civilizations is we never get simpler.
No.
We never go backwards and things never get simpler. Look at financial markets. You start out with barter, you wind up with, credit default swaps that even experts can't explain. So it just never gets simpler. It gets more and more and more complex and more difficult for humans to manage or even understand. Everything leads to greater complexity. That is the nature of progress.
This is Straight Talk in the COVID economy, and my name is Larry Quick. Our world has changed and there's no going back. The COVID economy is now very real. We are adapting to telework, Zooming, online learning and new industries like PanSafe and other opportunities revealed by COVID-19. The challenges are also with us: bankruptcies, unemployment, debt and confusion. In Straight Talk in the COVID economy, we meet thinkers and innovators who bring insight and information into the opportunities and risks of our rapidly emerging COVID economy. Straight Talk in the COVID economy is brought to you by Resilient Futures. This is alongside our partner, Impact Africa Network. Impact Africa Network is an innovation incubator based in Nairobi, Kenya. It seeks to be a catalyst for the next Silicon Valley in Africa. Impact Africa Network needs all the support we can provide. So please donate at www.impactafrica.network. Well, welcome everyone, and I'd like to welcome Rebecca Costa to today's interview or discussion. And we've actually decided to call it an eavesdrop with Rebecca Costa. And I've just been talking for what is now 47 minutes as a preempter to Rebecca's conversation. So I've had a great time already. So I'm hoping that you're going to have the same time. Now, Rebecca is an evolutionary biologist and combines technology with that. And she focuses on the perspective of the subject of adaptation. Now, I've taken this straight from an interview just recently, and she wanted to talk in that interview about irrational human behavior, the fact that we know problems and solutions exist, and we know that through the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're not getting those done. And complexity, we have to be able to start to come to terms with complexity in picoseconds, which for those is more finer than a nanosecond, if most of us understand what even a second is in time, very, very short period of time. Now, Rebecca's background, I'm not going to go through it. I'm just going to say, just Google Rebecca Costa and watch videos, consume anything that Rebecca has talked about in the past. And you must buy the Watchman's Rattle. I've got our book here, and I slimly promote it, Disruption, Strategy for Exponential Change. But I can tell you, I've recommended more people buy Rebecca's book than ours in the past. And it's described as a new theory of collapse. Her follow-on book is On the Verge. And that came out in 2017. And Rebecca is talking to us from Astoria in Oregon, or sometimes when I go to Oregon, they call it the Organ. There's actually a newspaper in Oregon called the Organ, which I found very interesting. And she lives in Cape Disappointment. So that's going to be an interesting to hear Rebecca. And I can tell you, Rebecca is nothing like a disappointment. So welcome, Rebecca.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's fantastic that you're talking to our audience today. So our discussion points, we're going to start off with looking at COVID-19 pandemic, and is this the evolutionary event we need to move towards embracing complexity? What happens as we see it in a situation like this, where you have a rapid drop-off from a disruptive discontinuity in a system such as social economic system. The amount of reliable information becomes much less, but complexity rises in most people's view. So you have to be very cautious. And this is one of the things in the Watchman's Rattle that was very rich in my understanding and helped me a lot in my understanding of complex environments. So the second point we're going to talk about is, can our future be controlled or created by us? Thirdly, Rebecca talks about artificial intelligence, particularly in On the Verge, and she talks about a rise in human intelligence, and I'm looking at both of those as a key foundation for the future. And finally, in a rapidly emerging COVID economy, what are the critical things we must consider? So Rebecca, to kick off, COVID-19 pandemic. Is this, you talk about events that make big changes. And I look at this and I think to myself, you know, we had the fires in Australia, which we thought were catastrophic. That was the Australian event, socially, economically, deeply impacted most of the Victoria, a lot of Victoria and New South Wales, the eastern states, was into the other states, but it was what we thought this was the event. And that was August, September, October, November, December, January and February, and then bang, COVID comes on, and we thought there was nothing like this going to happen, even though we'd been watching pandemics. But is this the evolutionary event we need to move towards embracing complexity?
Well, it's difficult to say what the triggering event is. You know, we look at the collapse of great civilizations, and historians tend to focus on what the trigger event was that caused the society to break up into smaller units. And I suppose that's interesting. But, you know, my interest is always, are there behaviors leading up to the triggering event, you know, which cause societies to become unraveled very, very quickly? I don't think we're there where COVID's concerned, because even though vaccines are probably many, many years away, I'm sorry that, you know, people are not going to be happy with what I have to say about vaccines, but you know, I have historical precedents to rely on. You know, in 1984, for example, when AIDS was spreading all over the place, and we were, you know, we had so much misinformation. I don't know if people remember. We thought if a mosquito bit a person with AIDS and then bit another person, that AIDS could be transmitted, and we were all up in arms about that. You know, that it was so easily transmitted. And we have the same problem right now with COVID. We have a lot of misinformation that's traveling around because of lack of real data. We really don't know what we're up against here. But in '84, when AIDS was spreading like wildfire, the head of human health services in the United States said, hey, we're going to have an all-out, research project to get a vaccine for AIDS. Let's remember that was 36 years ago. We don't have a vaccine for AIDS today, 36 years later. We've only successfully been able to vaccinate, excuse me, I'm very sorry. I've got a 6-month-old lab, and he's being very, very good up to this point. He's trying very hard. Bring him in, bring him in. He's trying very hard to be an adult dog right now, but he's having a little bit of trouble. In any event, back to our topic at hand, we have to remember that there is only one disease that we have been able to vaccinate our way to eradicating. In all of human history, with all the money we've put into vaccines, we've only eradicated one disease, and that one disease is smallpox. Every other disease that affects humankind exists somewhere on the earth waiting to rear its ugly head. So we're not going to get rid of COVID-19. We're not going to have a vaccination in all likelihood. But what we are good at is finding treatments. You don't have to die of AIDS anymore. As soon as we found AZT, we had a clue on how to treat people. And as soon as we remove the threat of death, as soon as you know that if you you have symptoms of COVID-19, you can go to your doctor writes you a prescription, you feel crappy for 1 or 2 days, and then you feel okay and you're not going to die of it. The chances are some of the things that we have gotten used to in our day-to-day life will return, some, but not all. And I say not all because humans are fast habituators. We're fast adapters. And we've now adapted to living at home. We've adapted to shopping online. We've adapted to this format, Zoom. using Zoom and using teleconferences and having online birthday parties and bar mitzvahs. And so because we've adapted so well, we're not going to return. We never go backwards. You know, we're not going to start washing our clothes by throwing them against rocks on rivers anymore. You know, we're just not going to return to those things. We move forward, we progress, and we're going to continue to progress. And part of that progress is that certain things will no longer be. Many of us will not return to offices. Well, he wants to get in the picture. There's just
oh, beautiful. That's fine.
So when we talk about a COVID economy, what we're talking about is a combination of bringing some things forward and many things that we were forced to habituate to will change. And one of those will be many of us will continue to work from home.
Yes. We're seeing that rise as a whole industry, because supporting that is immense. You know, we've done a lot of work around from, 2013 when I was on a committee, a national federal government committee on looking at telework and its potential positive impact for organisations. 2013 we had okay bandwidth, nowhere near what we've got now. ADSL, I think we had it 2013, then we went ADSL2. Now we're sort of at this, in Australia at least, at this broadband level. But, my view of that, as I've spoken to you, Rebecca, is about taking transactions off the road. You know, being able to transact information transactions, communication, education, online, production, making things happen, trading transactions, even to the point of export transactions of physical goods, where you can, particularly small componentry that can be manufactured, produced with 3D printers, is that you don't have to have those sorts of things. You can have lots of localized supply chains that don't necessarily require the physical transportation of the good. Now that's a bit further down the track, but we have right now, and picking up on your point there, that we've taken a move which was said to be very complex. I can remember talking to organisations, they say, sending people to work from home is extremely complex, and we'd have to do so much work around that. And then bang, they made it happen. Worked with universities that said we can't do online learning. Online learning, for us to organise that, and the academics don't want it. Bang, it happens. And sure, there's a bit of a stutter, etc., as we do it, but all of these sort of so-called no-go areas, too complex, all of a sudden become not complex. And then the feedback you get is, we've heard this so many times, I really like this. I don't really want to do what I was doing before.
Let's use education as an example. I mean, because you say, well, there was some resistance, right? There's some resistance to remote teaching and remote learning, because it was believed, and is probably true, that there was some benefit to having a college life experience, right? You socialize, you move out of the house, you go into dorms, you meet strangers, you're responsible for getting up and getting to your classes on your own. And so there was a sort of a life experience that you paid for. And so if you looked at the tuition of getting your degree online from an online university, right, versus the tuition of having to go to a physical university, right, that there was a huge discrepancy in the cost, the actual cost to attend, right, your tuition fees, your books, so on and so forth. There was a huge discrepancy. So now what happens to actual physical universities, right, who depend on students to come there for their revenues? Well, in all likelihood, it starts to get really complicated, because you don't want to compete with online universities that are getting really minuscule fees per student.
Yeah.
You can't survive doing that. So So now it gets complicated for them because they don't want to become an online university. There is value in having the college experience, but now you've got the COVID potential liability. So how do you reopen responsibly? It may very well be that until there's a therapy, and I believe there'll be a treatment or a therapy within a year. But let's say that there's this year that students are going to take gap years. So enrollment will be down. People will be fearful. They might not want to send their kid away to a college campus. Maybe they're going to direct them to a community college or take a gap year. So physical universities are in a bit of a tough spot. So it may be that they start to break out their services a little along the vulnerability of their students. So for example, older students, right? Or students with underlying health conditions can continue to take classes remotely. Students who are asymptomatic and have low physical probability of contracting the disease or dying of it may be able to have a choice to go online or come to the campus. And those who already tested for having COVID and have immunity may return to campus. So it may be that you have to go take a test, and if you show that you actually contracted COVID, even if you were asymptomatic, and now you have COVID immunity, whatever that means, because we have to talk about that, you may return to campus. If you don't have immunity but no underlying health conditions, you may have a choice to return to campus, but you're going to have to sign a big waiver that says if you get it, it's not our fault. And if you're older and you have an underlying condition, we will not allow you to return to the campus, but you can still get your degree and finish your classes remotely. So it now gets very complicated because you have 3 types of courses and 3 options and 3 tuition levels that are going to be paid, and it starts to get more complex. So I think that even though things look like they get simpler, they get more complicated because the nature of the evolution of civilizations is we never get simpler.
No.
We never go backwards and things never get simpler. Look at financial markets. You start out with barter, you wind up with, credit default swaps that even experts can't explain. So, it just never gets simpler. It gets more and more and more complex and more difficult for humans to manage or even understand. Everything leads to greater complexity. That is the nature of progress. When I remember that when the first video movies came out, we were absolutely positive that was the end of movie theaters. Why would anyone go and sit in a dark room with a bunch of strangers eating popcorn just to watch a movie? And then we were pretty sure that the video business would be all over once Netflix came out, and no one would ever go to a movie theater. Why would you go? You just get everything on Netflix on your computer. But if you notice that's not what happens. There are even people now that are collecting records and 8-track tapes.
Yeah.
Things never go away.
I'll never sell my vinyl. I'll never sell my vinyl.
There you go. The evolution of societies is the evolution of complexity until we get to a point where it's just unmanageable. And you were asking me earlier about a trigger event. Is COVID the trigger event? We're not quite there yet. We're getting very close. We're getting very close because one of the symptoms of complexity reaching an apex and making the society vulnerable to a triggering event is that there is mass confusion between facts and unproven beliefs. And increasingly leaders begin to forge public policy based on unproven beliefs. That's what the Watchman's Rattle was really about. Yeah. It was about the dangers of not being able to get at empirically proven facts anymore, and that the fact that leaders begin to forge public policy on erroneous opinions superstitions, ideas, theories, and eventually public policy becomes irrational. To
Yes.
your point, as COVID drives more people to work from home, right, it's very interesting that governments are responding to unemployment by wanting to invest in infrastructure.
Yep.
More bridges, more public transportation, wider highways that the people who are working from home aren't going to use. So we have this situation where unemployment is being met by these public works programs designed to increase and make better infrastructure that COVID is reducing the use of.
Correct.
And so there's kind of, we're getting close to the tipping point. We're getting close, because when you start to see this misalignment between the facts of what are going on in society and what public policy is addressing, that is the gap that causes societies to be vulnerable to an event like COVID. So I don't think COVID's quite it, but I think we're approaching a time where we are now being driven by unproven beliefs rather than facts, owing to the levels of complexity that the human brain is just simply not designed to be able to understand.
And I think that that's an interesting point, because you've also raised the point of that the COVID immunity and looking at a vaccine is highly problematic and more than likely not going to happen. And there's lots of.
Let me talk about COVID immunity for just a minute, because there's a lot of false information out there about COVID immunity. We don't know how long you will be immune to recontracting COVID, and there's a widespread. If you get the flu, generally you're immune for at least 6 to 8 months. That's kind of the time window, right? From getting it again, getting the same flu again. With some diseases like measles, it's for your life. You're immune for your life. So the window is somewhere between 6 and 8 months to forever until you die. With COVID, we don't know. We don't know how long that immunity is going to last, and we won't know until people who have had it get reinfected. So the real thing that what we're all watching is people who tested positive for having COVID in China, now 7, 8, 9 months, 1 year, 2 years. We have to see if some of those people become reinfected. That's when we'll know what the time frame is for the immunity. What makes it even more complex, because we're talking about complexity, is that we've identified, many lineages. We're up to somewhere between 11 and 16 lineages or mutations. There's a lot of debate about what a mutation really is and what counts as a lineage. But so are you immune to those mutations? Or can you you had one version of COVID-19, but you're not immune to the other mutations. So some of the mutations are stronger and some look to be weaker. We don't know enough about this disease. So we're not quite sure what immunity means. We're pretty sure immunity means 6 to 8 months. That we could say. But is it for the rest of your life? And does it make you immune to the other mutations? Don't know. This is what happens when a disease moves from an animal to a human. Now, one of the things that people should feel good about is it is very rare, extremely rare in nature, that a disease like this will move from an animal to a human. Even more rare is that disease that moved from an animal to a human then can transmit from one human to another human. That is extraordinarily rare. You usually need the animal as the intermediary. So what made the United States government and many governments very suspicious that this came out of the laboratory in Wuhan is that in the laboratory in Wuhan, China, they were studying what can you do to a virus that moves from an animal to a human to allow it to move from human to human. They were studying that precise thing. Now, unfortunately for the Chinese government, those scientists were publishing these works going back 10 years, 9 years, 8 years, right on up to last year. And because that's what scientists do, we publish our work. So those were a matter of public records, and we knew they were studying, why do you need an animal intermediary? What can you do to these diseases to allow them to transmit human to human without the animal intermediary? And so it's very coincidental this broke out in Wuhan's wet market. That is not the only wet market in China. They're all over China. So the fact that they were studying that and trying to figure out how these diseases go human to human, and had those bats that they were studying, made it very, very much seem like it came out of the lab. Now, we'll never know, because the forensic evidence you need to be able to trace that back to that laboratory has been destroyed. It's like a crime scene that's been destroyed. So we'll never fully know where this came from. But what we should feel good about is it's very rare that a disease jumps from an animal to a human and then human to human. This rarely happens.
So what we're saying here is that there's no going back from a what you could call a long-term pandemic.
We will never get rid of COVID-19.
Right.
And it will be a very long time before there's a safe vaccination that is highly effective. Even if we come up with a vaccination, my greatest worry is it's 10% effective. It's 5%, it's 15% effective. And we somehow feel if we get vaccinated, we have this false sense that we're protected. When we're protected maybe 15% to one lineage, which is nothing.
Yeah.
It would be better that we don't have a vaccine. Now, what we will have is we will have a treatment. Just like with AIDS, you don't have to die of AIDS. We have a lot of clues on how to prevent COVID from reproducing and from doing the kind of damage that it's doing, from disabling it. And those clues are very valuable in creating a treatment, a pharmaceutical or convalescent plasma therapy. There's a lot of therapies that are being looked at that have very, very good results. So I'm very confident on the positive side that between 6 months and 1 year, if you have COVID-19, it'll be like every other thing. You'll feel bad, you'll go to your doctor will write you a prescription, you'll go to the pharmacy, get the prescription, and you'll feel bad for a day or two, and then you'll be fine. Once death is taken off the table and you can't die of COVID, you'll start to see us resume some of the activities that we got used to before.
So let's jump to that point. So what we have is a COVID-19 environment that will last, say, a year to 18 months. Somewhere in that.
Until there's a treatment and you can't die from it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you really care if there's a vaccine if you can't die from it? You know, yeah. I mean, that's just right.
And I think that's the way that Australia's gone about it, is that what we're doing is opening up, and we've increased our ability to treat people, not necessarily, by intubation, not necessarily by a proper treatment, in the same way we have for bronchitis or a unique atypical pneumonia. Interesting to note very quickly is that last year I had pneumonia, an atypical pneumonia, because I've got a history of I had leukemia 10 years ago, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I got an atypical pneumonia, and no one knew where it came from. Infectious diseases, people said, it should have come from a bird. And I went, well, you know, do you garden? And I went, no, not really. Yeah, but a bird, like, I don't know how I'd get it from a magpie or something like that. Anyway, they got me in hospital and they said, you're all okay now, just go home and rest and you'll be okay. And about a week later, I woke up and I couldn't breathe. They got me into hospital and they'd found my lungs had been attacked. And they said, I was a bit out of it at the time, but more than likely he's going to die. But we'll try one thing which we think will work, which was prednisolone and the steroid. And they whacked me full of that, which I've been taking for graft versus host disease for 10 years. And I'm still on 6 milligrams a day. Interesting, just yesterday we heard that the prednisolone is being used in 6 milligram forms as way of treating COVID-19, and they're getting good results out of it. And I think to myself, what was that atypical pneumonia that I had that even 2 infectious disease guys, one was a lung specialist, one was infectious diseases, one was head of the intensive care unit at the hospital I was in, and all 3 of them said, we've never seen this before. We don't know what to do. Should we put a ventilator and intubate him? No, because I don't think he'll survive that. So what we'll do is just whack him full of steroid. And I think they gave me somewhere between 70 and 100 milligrams a day intravenously. And 5 days later, even though I was wasted away, I couldn't hardly walk. I walked into a ward, at least, out of the intensive care unit. And it's almost like I've had potentially an experience of COVID-19 without having it.
Yes, a respiratory illness will always play out very similarly. Yeah. And our latest information is that these steroids seem to be working, disabling the virus as they would other kinds of diseases. But the thing to note about the particular ailment that you had, that they suspected had come from some kind of a bird.
Yes.
The important thing to note is you were not contagious. You could not give that to your wife or your children.
No.
And that's why COVID-19 is of particular interest to us, similar to AIDS.
Yes.
In that we're always interested. I mean, it's interesting that you suffered that disease, but we're not contagious. But in some cases like SARS, AIDS, COVID-19, the fact that you become contagious and can spread it to other humans is the great danger. That's what caused the pandemic.
Yeah, as opposed to my experience, which was over and done.
Which is over and done, and you don't have to be isolated from your family, and it's not as though you start a pandemic. Yeah. So this is why this is very unusual. It's unusual because of its ability to go human to human to human, and the treatment that was used for you is the treatment that's looking most positive. That and remdesivir and convalescent plasma therapy, which has been around for a really long time. These are not new therapies, by the way. They've been around for respiratory illnesses for a long time. And are there new therapies that are being looked at right now and developed? Yes, absolutely. And every day we learn more about disabling this virus. This is why historically, if you just look at the history of medicine, we're better at keeping you from dying of a disease than we are getting it. We can't keep you from getting cancer. We can't keep you from getting just about anything.
But we can fix it.
I mean, that's your immune system's job.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that in one of the news conferences, people were saying, well, why are older people, we should study why older people are more, susceptible to COVID-19. And I was sort of chuckling to myself, but it was unfair because I'm a scientist. And I remember Dr. Fauci goes, we don't need to study it. We know why. As you get older, your immune system, effectiveness declines. That's just a function of age.
Yeah.
You don't have to have any underlying conditions. You're already compromised by just the fact that you're older,
Yeah.
So even if you're the healthiest person in the world, it doesn't matter. It's a function of age in your immune system.
So let's go to if we're looking at this time, we're going to have to embrace complexity as it definitely grows as a socio-economic shift, particularly as the environment still presents itself as a problem. And we'll, if I just think about the people who have had to go through the bushfires in Australia and also be having to deal with COVID-19 and reconfigure their economies, because their economies mostly are based on tourism. A lot of the villages, etc., the towns that were affected. So they're dealing with this deeply complex disruption. And complexity is going to grow, as you've said, around, say, for instance, online learning, but the complexity of distributed workforces, et cetera, et cetera. So, and my other talking point was raising human intelligence or artificial intelligence or both to deal with complexity. You've talked about on the verge, utilization of artificial intelligence. But I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on human intelligence being able to really understand. We're not taught this in school. We were taught that, we live in a complex environment. It's based on complex systems thinking, and you teach that to kids. We talk about whole systems rather than these siloed things that we work in. We talk about whole systems of body and whole systems of nature and whole systems of economies and social. So if kids were taught that as a basic learning function, alongside some other things that are missed out, would we be able to, increase human intelligence alongside artificial intelligence to make the complex at least appear simple so we can work in the environment we've actually created for ourselves?
The answer I'm going to give you is a bit complex.
Okay, go for it.
When it comes to actual data and information, I trust machines much more than I trust humans. We have all kinds of prehistoric biases and interpretations and points of view. Ed Wilson put it best. He said, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. and I've never been able to put it more succinctly. That is our condition right now. So I don't trust Paleolithic emotions. There are many reasons humans believe something, don't believe it. We're biased in so many unconscious ways that machines are not. Machines don't really care about your feelings. They're just going to, artificial intelligence is just going to tell you what the data says. And it doesn't really care how you feel about how that data is. And we're at the point right now where the data sets are so massive. I mean, look at the amount of information that we create. We create it roughly in every 12 months as much data as we created from the dawn of humankind to year 2015. So there's just no way we could keep up with all of that. And if you think about it, people are increasingly more and more relying on machines than they are other humans, right? Your neighbor might say, hey, you know what? I think it might rain tomorrow because it kind of smells funny in the air. And I always notice when there's that smell, rain is on the way. And you'll walk in your front door and you'll say, Google, what's the weather tomorrow? And if Google says it's going to be cloudy but no rain, you're probably going to trust Alexa or Google or some other apparatus, a smart speaker in your house, your cell phone, National Weather Report, whatever, more than your neighbor. Even though you like your neighbor and you would trust them in an emergency, but maybe not for data. So I think that we're going through a transition where we're relying on, and whether we know it or not, or willing to admit it or not, trusting more and more what machines have to say. And we're relying on machines and mechanical apparatus more and more to run our lives as well. I happen to think this is a good thing. A lot of people don't like me to say this, but machines are cleansed of prehistoric biases which have not served humankind well. And because of that, I think we can trust the data. And I think that in many cases, if we had public policy based on data that machines were indicating, because at this particular juncture, we have so much data that predictive analytics is getting more and more precise as being able to predict the future, which is why we know when to evacuate people in certain areas when a hurricane's coming in, and we're getting better and better at getting more and more warning when a tsunami is likely. We're just getting better and better at our predictions. If you think about it, a couple of decades ago, if a woman was, pregnant, we didn't know if she was having a boy or a girl. Now, with 100% certainty, we know the gender of the child, and we even know if the child has any pre-existing conditions before they're born. A few decades ago, we didn't have that capability. We have it now. We can genetically test you to see if you're susceptible to brain cancer or breast cancer or testicular cancer. And we can head those things off. So we're fast approaching a time where all of this data is allowing us to make really precise predictions and then head off negative consequences before they occur. This is a power unlike anything humanity has ever had. The ability to see the consequences of an action and then head off a negative consequence. We know what happens in the event of climate change. We know we're moving from global warming to, as you point out, global burning. We're making that leap right now. We know how that ends. We can jump to the last chapter of the book. We've never been able to do that before. And it arms us with a tremendous power. So when people ask me, well, what will the role of humans be if decisions are being made and data is being analyzed, that the human brain hasn't evolved to be able to comprehend that kind of data or even find those patterns or be able to make those predictions with such accuracy? What would the role of humans be? The role of humans will be to be the stewards of ethics, morality, compassion, the things we will never be able to teach machines. Ed Wilson and I had an interesting conversation one day. He's the great naturalist out of Harvard University. And we were talking about, for some reason, maybe we'd had too many cocktails, but we were having a conversation about, if extraterrestrial beings were to land on the planet. And he said something very interesting to me. He said, I don't think they'll be very interested in our mathematics or our science or even our technology, because we find that as we get further and further out into space, all of the laws regarding physics and the physical universe and mathematics, they're holding true. So presumably, if they make it here to Earth, they have the same math and science and physics, and they understand the physical universe the way that we understand it. So that's of no interest to them. But however, Ed pointed this out. He said what they will be fascinated with is what makes us uniquely human, because that will be nowhere in the universe. Our music, our art, our poetry, our literature, our philosophy, our compassion, our ideas of love, how we rear our children. These are the things that make us uniquely human, not the mathematics, technology, and science. Those are better subcontracted to machines, because machines are able to do things that our brains are not able to do, and we're able to do things that machines will never be able to do. And so I think there will be a natural and organic parting of the sea, if you will.
Wow, I'm glad you said that, because I think that distinction is really critical, because when we're talking about the COVID economy, the first thing that we talk about in all of the work we do is, what do you value? There's a question for people, is that and I think this has been a time where you talk about ethics, values, those type of things that are uniquely human, that machines can't permeate in their own right from a human perspective, that they're the ones that are hopefully mutable through this sort of this situation. In a COVID economy, values have changed in our view, and I see that as a, we see there's if we looked at the industrial economy, and we talk about the big reset that was occurring about future of work and technology and how it was going to work itself out, and climate change was off into the distance, and there was fallout or a dropout, what we call dropout from that perspective. People dropped out of the Great Transition or were forced out. They were forced out of work because right to the middle classes, because they didn't understand the technologies that the organizations were adopting. So in a way, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, etc., are seen as the enemy, if you like, and it caused that fallout. I mean, the automation of manufacturing is one of the biggest, attacks on the United States economy, not necessarily outsourcing to China, even though they want the jobs back. Why would you want those jobs back? Because what you get someone who can operate a machine doesn't employ too many people in terms of manufacturing. But so that was seen as the enemy, and you had that dropout. Now we've got the COVID economy, and we've got what we call the fallout from that, because a lot of those square meter economy type jobs, such as pubs and restaurants and all that sort of stuff, can't get as close to each other through social distancing. So you've got this fallout and this dropout. And what we saw was a trigger, in my view, of values being expressed like, damn it, we're going on the streets throughout the world about Black Lives Matter. It was like a trigger event of values that was exhibited by every person. I mean, George died through that. We've seen that before. That's happened before. And
yes, but we haven't seen it when we've had a deadly pandemic.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, people who basically,
for me, that's an expression.
I know I could die as a consequence of this, but I would rather live in a moral world.
Exactly. But what I'm getting at is that we see this combination of the fallout from people from the Great Reset, as we call it, with the artificial intelligence future of work being all mixed up, and then you have the fallout, or it's a dropout to the fallout from the COVID economy. And we've in Australia got 1 million people unemployed like that, are all hospitality workers, etc., etc. Yes. And that's going to continue to occur. So all of a sudden there's this free time, if you like, and anger and people coming together around a moral purpose, which is Black Lives Matter. No, I'm not just taking anything away from Black Lives Matter, because I think it's an important subject, but it could have been something else that maybe brought people together on values that said this is wrong. And it's such
again, what makes us uniquely human is our compassion, our moral values, our ethics. Those are the things that, you really can't automate. And I think that, as you point out, it's a good example that we have a pandemic happening right now, and yet you have people who are literally risking their lives in order to take a moral stance. I have another example for you of a judge I happen to know here up in Portland. Increasingly, people might not know this, but increasingly judges are relying on artificial intelligence programs to give them guidelines for sentencing arraignments. Now, this is a pretty frightening thing, because in the past, judges were worried about their bias. They might look at a criminal record. The guy he's got tattoos on. Maybe I don't let him set bail. He looks dangerous. You just really don't know. And being a judge on a bench is very, very difficult to understand what your own biases might be. And then to compensate for those biases, how would you compensate and how much? So judges were using AI-based formulas more and more to decide whether people get bail, they get out, or how long they have to stay, what their sentencing guidelines should be, so on and so forth. It was interesting. I have a friend who's a judge, and he said, yeah, I really like the guidelines. They basically look at the person's history, whether they work, they have a family, have they been incarcerated before, priors, everything. They look at all of this data that you couldn't possibly take time to as a judge and condense it down and kind of give a risk score and tell you what, would be the most advisable thing to do. And he said, yeah, that's really good. But he goes, but every now and again, he says, I get in my car and I go down to the jail and I meet the person. I got to look them square in the eye.
Yeah.
And he said, tell me what that is. Why can't I just look at the advice given based on all their priors, their family, whether they're employed, their credit score, all of these things that this artificial intelligence model has put together that's way smarter than me? Why do I need to look the person in the eye before I decide whether I'm going to grant them bail or not? And I said, because you're human and they're human. And it's not the role of an AI program to determine whether someone's going to be incarcerated, gets bail, returns to their family. It's not something that a computer can do. Even with facial recognition software that can determine whether you're lying, deflecting, exaggerating, even with AI programs that are very complicated and extremely successful, this is a judge who still goes down to the jail. He has the guidelines and he says, I want to see the person. I want to eyeball him.
Yeah.
I want to look at his eyes. I want to watch whether he's nervously pacing back and forth or wringing his hands or looking at me like he's going to come out and kill me. So there you have it. I mean, AI can take us part of the way. There are some decisions we want AI to make for us. For example, today you go into an emergency room. Doesn't matter if the best doctor in the hospital or the worst doctor in the hospital takes you in. If they've got a IBM Watson machine, they go in and they put in all your critical information. They don't know you from Adam. You've just rolled in a gurney. And IBM Watson will say it's 90% the person is going to die of this, 80% this, 70% this, 60% this. And here's the real kicker. And it says, and if you get me this information next, I can increase my diagnosis probability, accuracy by 8%. And so it gives you a pointer as to what's the next most important piece of information in order to keep increasing and it creates a dialogue in plain English. You don't have to be a computer programmer. So even if a lowly doctor that just graduated med school takes you in, they're as good as the best doctor in the hospital in terms of being able to treat you. So you do want AI to play a critical role. You want to trust that information. But you have to really be discerning about whether it's an ethical and a moral issue, or is this just a data-driven decision that must be made?
Yeah.
In COVID's situation, I would argue it's a data-driven decision that must be made. But at the same time, complexity was going up. The amount of data, real data we had about COVID was going down. It's that phenomena that creates worry for me. When I see complexity skyrocket and real data diving.
Yeah.
And what do we do to bridge the two? We come up with unproven beliefs and opinions. Yep. This is how humans work. When complexity goes up and real empirical data goes down, we start talking about hydroxychloroquine.
Yes.
You know, we start talking about, well, maybe we'll be able to inject Clorox and fix it. I mean, I hate to rail on that example, but it's the one that sticks out in my mind. As I was watching the press conference, I said, whoa, we have so little data, we're grasping at straws, and we even have the president of the United States grasping at straws, articulating things verbally that probably should have been kept quiet, right? But again, when you have that situation where complexity is going up, real, actual, empirical, proven data is going down, the real solution, the bridge you must build, is diversification. And we know this because we know how we react to financial markets. We know that financial markets have gone from barter systems where you and I meet in the street and we bicker and then we trade to credit default swaps that nobody understands. And so we have complexity going up, and we have real data that's changing by the minute going down. And in a case like that, where you don't have the real data and you have complexity going up, what do you do when you invest in the financial markets? You diversify. You buy some bonds, some stocks, some real estate. You spread you make lots of small bets. And that, fortunately, is what most governments did. They made many, many small bets. What did they do? Wash your hands, wear a mask, stay 6 feet away, right? Shelter in place. What were all of the lists? I made a big list of all the programs that the US did in particular, because I couldn't believe how diversified their programs were and as quickly as they got on top of them. Can I read them to you?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Social distancing, shelter in place. They formed a task force, checking temperatures, hand washing, masks and gloves, disinfecting surfaces, contact tracing, Defense Production Act, call for volunteerism, hydroxychloroquine, convalescent plasma therapy, remdesivir, drive-through testing, close public institutions, parks, close air travel from infected areas, the CARES Paycheck Protection Program, supplemental unemployment, CFAP food assistance, SBA small business loans, state and local government assistance, local suspension of evictions, IRS deadline suspension and leniency, FFCRA tax credits, daily press conferences, early prison release, insurance company cooperation, student loan payment deferment. It goes on and on. And what did they do? They didn't know what would work. Had no idea. There was no empirical basis on which to know what would work. So in a case like that, you become a venture capitalist. You're going to make lots of small bets. And then in real time, look at the data that's coming back. Pretty soon we knew cleaning surfaces, it wasn't working that well. It really doesn't do a lot. The virus doesn't survive on surfaces as long as we thought it might. Same on hydroxychloroquine. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, that one's out. We start crossing them off the list, just like a venture capitalist that might invest in lots of companies in one particular space, but only for round one. And then what do? Right? They have triage. If you have not advanced and shown and performed, you don't get round two funding. And so it's like a funnel. They start out with, let's just grab every company in the 3D printing space or in the AI space or in the 5G communication space or in blockchain technology, whatever it is, the technology of the day. They start out and they throw a lot of money at round one, and at round two, very few make it. And round three, even fewer make it until they have a winner at the bottom of the skinny end of the funnel. And the same thing happens in emergencies. When complexity goes up and data goes down, you're a venture capitalist. You're making lots of small bets with triage points along the way. And that's the only way you can do it, because we're not capable of doing it any other way. Now, AI is capable if we have the data. But in a case like this, you need real-time data, because historical data wasn't a whole lot useful. This was a big discovery that we made. In my view, we made two really significant discoveries. One, all this data we're amassing is really great looking back, but when we run into a situation like COVID-19, the historical data isn't as valuable as real-time data. So the gathering of real-time data is much more critical. And I think we kind of got used to the fact that we could look at patterns going back, and that would inform us of what the future outcomes would be. And that wasn't the case on COVID-19. A second thing that I'm going to bring up that you and I have not talked about, and that is an over-reliance on just-in-time inventory. Every company in the world was seduced by just-in-time inventory.
Yeah.
Big superstores, they used to have warehouses in the back where they had a certain amount of inventory. Not anymore. Now they just have bays where the trucks come up and deliver exactly the number of products that you sold yesterday. So if it's a, if it's Superstore that sold 25 cans of tomato soup, those cans are scanned, and that factory or distribution point knows to bring out that exact number of cans the following day. And we began treating everything as though it was cans of tomato soup. But a ventilator is not a can of tomato soup. Someone's life depends on it. PPE, same type of thing. But the reason we got seduced by just-in-time inventory is because in business, you want your money working for you. And inventory is a really bad idea. It has your money sitting. It's not working for you. And you may or may not need those products. And one of the big economic lessons going forward in the COVID economy that for sure will have a big impact is, number one, you must make a discernment between those products that are essential, and you're going to have to bite the bullet and inventory them and lock up your money. You're going to have to tie up your money because you went too far the other direction. The pendulum went too far to just in time, and as soon as the supply chain broke down and you couldn't get it, when you got used to getting, putting your order in and getting it the following day, as soon as you couldn't do that anymore, just-in-time inventory was never developed to handle peak loads. And we had a mother of a peak load problem. And so suddenly hospitals couldn't get anything. And so this was a warning that we went too far the other way, and that there are some products you have to bite the bullet and you have to inventory and tie up your finances. Another thing that we learned that was very important is in the food, particular to the food chain, but also to some manufacturing plants. And that is, you'll notice that there was a lot of coverage of food being thrown away at a time when people needed food. And that's because these massive plants that delivered food to commercial organizations, let's say they packaged chicken up for prisons, they weren't geared to make little retail packages for supermarkets. They were sending truckloads of whole chickens to prisons, right? Or to hospitals. And so when they couldn't do that anymore, everyone was saying, well, why can't we have these foods in the grocery stores? Well, because their production lines weren't set up that way. In the same way that the automotive plants weren't set up to make face shields and ventilators. So the other lesson that we're going to learn as we move into a COVID-19 economy is you need resiliency in your factories. You need fabrication resiliency. You need to be able to pivot, right? And that's really important. Whether it's an education situation like a campus, maybe you don't want dormitories that are big buildings where all the students are crammed together. Maybe you want smaller modular units that can be pulled apart, right? You need flexibility in an emergency. And you have to build that in. And I think that whether it's a factory or whether it's on a university campus and you're talking about student housing, I think we're going to be looking at things being much more modular and reconformable, if that's even a word.
Wow. Well, I guess the last question was, I just don't want to stop this interview. But we have to think about time, but we are going to get back together again. Promise me.
That we will, absolutely. We're part of the same tribe.
We are the tribe, and you're one of my tribe. I'm one of your tribe, because well, my head just goes crazy when I'm talking to you, and I know that I've got a little microphone in front of me, and I've just been texting other meetings saying 9:15, shift to 9:30, no, shift to 10. So I've got 8 minutes.
I'm sorry I'm making you late for other meetings.
Not Rebecca, it's, wow. But, if I could just in 5 minutes finish off with what in this, we see it as this rapidly emerging COVID economy, which is a pattern, and is just taking that we're recognizing as a pattern, and the pattern has to have a language. When we look at a photograph of a park or that people are playing sport in or having a picnic, it's a park. If we look at a football match as a pattern, and if you understand the pattern language and the cues that it is a pattern, you understand what's going on. And someone says, "What's that?" You say, "It's a football match." And they've never seen a football match before. They go, "I don't understand. What do you mean by a football match?" Some people who've been deeply immersed in the Amazon, if they see a park, they don't get that it's a park. It's just an array of little conditions occurring that is complex. And how do you do that? So we have a way of reducing or simplifying very complex environments by having a pattern language and a perception of what's going on there as a thing. And we're seeing this thing called a COVID economy emerging that we're following. And where I think one of the key things that I got was that, we know that when there's a disruption occur at any scale, and this is global scale, that information, or as you said, data just goes shoo, like that. And you can't go back to the past to say, well, this is what it does. And a lot of people try and do that. They try and fit.
Now you need real-time data.
Exactly. That you need real-time information. But, when it's dropped like that, like my organization works this way, and that information, that pattern that you had in your head about your organization drops, the past data no longer makes sense about the emergent data or the immediate data. And you actually become very confused, disoriented, et cetera, which has happened for a lot of people. Then what you'll do is try and automatically using innate pattern recognition skills, look at the conditions, what are the patterns that I'm seeing emerging? And one of them is work from home, bang, you operate at that speed, you can do it. Then you've got something to measure as to how productive that's being. And in a lot of cases, people are finding it extremely productive, but at both ends of the scale, for the worker and for the organisation. So, what we're seeing is this telework industry will have to support that. Like when you're in your office and your computer doesn't work, you call a guy and he comes down, and it's from, IT services, comes down, fixes your computer, goes home. Who does that? The IT guy can't do it because he's got 1,000 people to look up. He can't do it. He has to have a workforce that's going to support that person. I can't work from home. It'll drive me crazy. The kids running around. And so they've got to have those little resources in local communities that will do that. So there's loads of industry opportunity in teleworking in the COVID telework industry. So what we're seeing is, what I'm hearing you say is, be able to measure that in your organization so you get real-time data as to what are the opportunities and risks of a distributed workforce, and then know what that industry offering you're going to need. So that if we can sort of research the the needs for a distributed workforce from organisations. It doesn't have to be a lot. And there's already loads of data on distributed workforces and how you work with them based on previous telework studies that have been done. The biggest constraint on teleworking was that people just didn't do it. It wasn't about the facts of it. It was about the fiction of working in dense environments. Oh, you can't control people. You have, they'll do all this stuff. They'll be off there playing golf. Well, as long as you get the job done, who cares if they play golf or they attend, where should they attend the meeting? In the golf house or in a coffee shop? It doesn't matter really, as long as the job gets done and they're available if they need to be. So then you look at the what services are required and measure those in a community so that you get real data to see what the support systems, then you invest based on that data coming back from an industry.
That's right. You're going to make lots of small bets.
Exactly.
Like people working at home and we're going to close this and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. You're going to just make lots of small bets. And then you've got to put measurements in place and rely on the real data, not your own perception, not your own fears, not your own biases, but allow the data to inform you. I wanted to share something with you because based on COVID, people were saying, well, can you give me like a structure of what happens when these events occur? And so recently I broke it down into 7 levels. So I wanted to just share that with you. So the first level is disbelief, denial, delay, and a misunderstanding of exponentiation. Now we could do a whole program on when problems begin to exponentiate, why we have evolved as linear thinkers and we don't get on top of them soon enough. Exactly. And that already is a problem.
Yep.
Level 2 is there's a rush to act with very little verifiable data, and then there's forced collaboration as a result of that. Level 3 is that we double down on actions which show early effectiveness based on metrics. Level 4 is that we refine the analytics and our priorities based on the new data and analytics. Level 5 is we begin to optimize and maximize our response. Level 6 is we institutionalize the successes for future readiness. And level 7 is we begin to develop what I call a predaptive culture. Peter Drucker said it best. He said, culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah.
And so unless you have a forward-facing culture, right, that nothing really changes. You're just waiting for the next emergency and to go through all those stages again. Yes. If you have a forward-facing, if you take this lesson forward and you successfully get to level 7, it changes your culture in a meaningful way as an organization and causes you to be a forward-facing organization. So I kind of broke those 7 levels down, and you can look at the parallels in how our governments are handling the COVID situation. You can see that they've gone through each of these levels, and we are now right around level 4, where we're refining analytics and priorities based on new data. We know hydroxychloroquine out. We know steroids in. So we're starting to do some refinement. The next stage, of course, will be to optimize and maximize that response. Those things that worked will get more investment. Those things that didn't work so well, they get killed.
Wow. Well,
does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And what I'm going to do is, if I can get after we'll talk about after we're finished. But thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I never thought we actually been talking for 2 hours, and I could just stay here, until it's midnight your time. But that can't happen. But thanks so much, Rebecca. Don't go away because I'll have a chat with you after, but thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having the discussion.
We hope you've enjoyed this Straight Talk in the COVID Economy podcast. Thank you for listening. And please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. For more information about Resilient Futures, please visit www.resilientfutures.com and please support our partner, Impact Africa Network, at www.impactafrica.network. We need all the support we can to help them build their own incubator. We know that there are many other great podcasts out there, and your time is precious, and you chose to listen to this great talk on the COVID economy. And we appreciate that. Thank you.